by Kyle Brown. Hello to you, Kyle. Starting off with Mr. Obama's tour of the Middle East.
That's right. Well, it obviously got a lot of coverage on our channel and in the papers. And the New York Times, first of all, just did a lovely cartoon of the whole thing, making two jokes at once, really. One on what some people say is an over-reliance on the teleprompter, that Obama uses them rather too liberally, and at the same time showing that he has to rely on that teleprompter to remind him to say that he's so chuffed to see Netanyahu. Now, moving on swiftly to the other papers, of course, they're all covering it now because he's wrapping up today his Middle East tour. Now, looking at the Economist now, Economist this week is leading with a number of stories on Obama and his attempts to get the so-called peace process started once again. It says, listen, yes, you can say he's a talker and it's all about the rhetoric, but what a speech he gave. He had Israelis in tears. He was actually engaging in the kind of Israeli narrative, as it puts it. It explains that he really tried to speak to Israelis as though through their eyes, saying that they had made numerous sacrifices. They said, we recognize that you had withdrawn from Gaza only to be hit with terrorist attacks. And he cites a number of examples. Then he actually shifts and sees things as though through Palestinian eyes. And The Economist says it's quite a feat that he accomplished, because they say he's managed rhetorically perhaps to have created a foundation on which he can shift the whole discussion and try to convince the Israelis that they're in a tough neighborhood, yes, but now that's even more reason for them to seek some kind of peace agreement with the Palestinians.
The Financial Times thinks they have a different take on the whole thing.
Now, the FT, they say, well, this is the whole problem, is that there's been far too much rhetoric from Obama, and there's been no policy achievement, since his big speech in Cairo 4 years ago. It signaled a possible reconciliation with the Muslim world. And the FT says, since then, very little has been achieved, and now we have yet another speech. It doesn't seem to jive with the stakes that are the level of urgency that's at stake right now in the Middle East.
Okay, next up, let's move on to Cyprus in crisis.
Well, Cyprus now, obviously, in the news every single day of the week. Right now, we're looking at some kind of alternative being sought to the 10 billion that was originally proposed by the EU and the IMF. Now, the New York Times says it's not a big deal that the whole program fell through, because yes, it might be very dangerous for Cypriots themselves, but for the EU, it's less than half a percentage point of the whole economy. It's not a big deal. Obviously, that's not what the way the other papers are seeing it. The Financial Times is saying this is the potential Russian connection, because Cyprus has been driven into the arms, they're saying, of the Russians because of the EU, what they call a ham-fisted attempt to come up with this kind of plan. And now, as a result, the Russians could be using this as a way to kind of get into Europe and to use their influence, for example, to put a stranglehold on the EU in terms of access to energy. Now, then there's just one more paper. Do we have time to go into the mail?
We do have time, yes. The Daily Mail, as it often does, it's predicting doom.
It's predicting doom. That's right, and it's actually you might be guilty of thinking it's a bit over the top. It's saying
never
perhaps this one time because it's warning that we could be in the grip of a new Cold War, and it's saying why? Well, actually, not only does it involve economic stakes, but this the Cypriots, if they warm that much more to the Russians, they could actually get access to a naval base in the area, could have military ramifications. As the Mail goes on to say, this could spell doom for the Brits and the West in general.
High stakes, Kyle Brown. Thank you very much for that roundup of the international press. Just going to remind you of the world news headlines now, and the ex-president and